Assisted death in Switzerland means that you can go to one of the centres and there's generally two options. You can either take a drink. Most people die within about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, so what he's talking about is physician-assisted suicide, right? So physician-assisted suicide is when the doctor helps the patient take their own life. So the doctor may prescribe some sort of lethal medication, which the patient then takes, right? And that's in contrast with euthanasia, which is when the doctor directly kills the patient by, for instance, injecting them with some lethal medication.
It can take up to hours to die that way. Life Circle, which is where I apply for mine, they use an intravenous method. And that's done quite simply by an intravenous drip being put in.
Okay, so my question is, who pushes the button? If the patient pushes the button, which then causes the lethal medication to go through the IV, then it's still suicide. If somebody else does it, then it's euthanasia.
My dad, Vincent Pandolfo, he was a cracking fella, couldn't have asked for a better father and friend. Unfortunately, just at the latter end of 1999, he then developed MSA-related dementia, which was horrendous because it changed him completely from what he was. He was always a keep fit fanatic. Well, the MSA put Paul to that because he couldn't move at all. But he was a kind, sharing man. He was a man of high principles, but he became the very antithesis of that. He became crude, he became lewd. He had lots of day terrors, night terrors, hallucinations, wouldn't know who he was. For the last 4 or 5 years of his life, he never called me Alex.
Okay, so this guy has personal experience with somebody else who has gone through a very slow and horrifying dying process, right? And perhaps that experience is informing his own decision.
All the people who was supporting Dad knew him, loved him, respected him, as relations or close friends, etc. He couldn't have had better care. He couldn't have had better support. He couldn't have had that individual support. Everything was unique to him. We met his needs as they came up as best we could.
So apparently this guy's dad had the best care possible, right, for him as an individual patient. Despite that, there was nothing that they could do to fight the disease. And that really gives you a sense of powerlessness, right? Like, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter, how much money that you have. This is part of the human condition, right?
Long after my dad died, that Mum was, poorly and we couldn't figure out what it was. She was suffering repeated epilepsy. But nothing, people think about epilepsy, normally think about somebody shaking and form that kind of thing. But Mum would be just closing her eyes seconds, but she'd be having hundreds, if not more, per day. And she was in hospital, and my sister and I was told that she's probably got about a month to live. And it wasn't 4 or 5 weeks afterwards, it was nearly 5 years. So both of them ended up struggling for 5 years.
Wow.
With incurable conditions, untreatable conditions, and no quality of life whatsoever. And they both were fully supportive and would have had an assisted death.
Are you able to just explain for someone that might not know what assisted dying is?
Assisted death in Switzerland means that you can go to one of the centres and there's generally two options. You can either take a drink, which is at Dignitas, and that normally involves you have to take an anti-vomiting drink an hour before you take the drink, and then you take the drink, and an hour later you take the drink with the lethal drugs in. Most people die within about 10, 15 minutes. It can take up to hours to die that way. Life Circle, which is where I apply for mine, they use an intravenous method, which is a lot more humane. You've not got that bitter taste, you've not got that, well, I need to stop myself being sick for an hour, etc. And that's done quite simply by an intravenous drip being put in. And And the slide that goes in, is it called a catheter, whatever the term is that goes in. The only difference between what you have in hospital and what's there is there's a slide on it, and you have to be able to remove, bring the slide down yourself. Whilst
Okay. So the fact that you have to do it yourself means that it's still suicide and not euthanasia.
So respect everything that they do in Switzerland. What that does do is it discriminates against people who haven't got the mobility or the dexterity to move it. So somebody with locked-in syndrome, for example, wouldn't bear to have that death.
Yeah. So what he's talking about here is that for these assisted dying places, because that you have to physically, take the drink or physically move the catheter or something like that, that prevents people who have mobility issues from taking advantage of these services, right? So somebody who's completely paralyzed won't be able to take a drink or take a pill or something like that.
And your personal relationship with assisted death, how did that come about?
I think watching both mum and dad suffer gave me, that kind of confirmation that it was right. And I saw what could happen to people. So in March, I'd had a few problems. I wasn't communicating right. I was having trouble writing things to people. Time became a little bit of an issue for me. And soon after that, I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So that immediately, that was, okay, I know where this goes. Oh, and his prognosis was 3 to 5 years to live. Although I could live a lot longer than that. I could live up to 11 years, but certainly after the 3 to 5, I wouldn't know who I am or where I am or what I was doing.
Yeah. So he has his previous experience seeing his parents go through this dying process, this very horrendous dying process. He didn't think that they had a good quality of life at all. And he believes that his own parents would have chosen something like physician-assisted suicide. And so now that he's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and he knows something about the disease, he's expecting to go through some similar dying process, some, just very sad and terrible dying process. And he wants to avoid it, right? And the way to avoid it is to end your life earlier.
But then I got a letter back from them, and there was a few more things I had to do. The first one was I had to write a piece about my family history, what kind of life I'd had, what the relationship with my parents was like, that kind of stuff. And then probably one of the hardest things to do, I think, if you're of sound mind, is to write why you want to die. I don't really feel like dying today. But you've got to sit down and write that, and that can be really testing. And I think it was in the writing process, I just don't know what this is about, but during that process I realised it was a really good, strong safeguard. Because to sit down and write why you want to die, believe me, even with a condition like Alzheimer's and the experience with my parents, it wasn't the easiest thing to write down.
I think it's a good idea to have patients reflect on these choices, because death, by definition, is irreversible, right? Like once you die, we cannot bring you back. And because the consequence is so serious, we want to make sure that patients truly want that decision, to make that decision, right?
The next thing I had to do was I had to go and get a capacity assessment of psychiatrist. Again, fortunately, because of my social groups, I knew a psychiatrist that I could go to. And then just after that, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks after I sent the information off, I got what they call a green light.
Okay, so a capacity assessment, what he's talking about is that patients have the right to make medical decisions for themselves as long as they have what's called decision-making capacity, okay? This is really important. So decision-making capacity is made up of 4 subcapacities. 1 is understanding, right? 2 is appreciation. 3 is reasoning. And then 4th is communication, okay? Basically, what it means is that if you have capacity, it means that you understand what's going on. You understand the medical information that's being conveyed to you, right? That you can appreciate your situation and that you can reason through the different treatment options and that you can communicate your choices. So if you possess all 4 of those subcapacities, then you have decision-making capacity.
Obviously, making the decision to have an assisted death, what, in your opinion, is the difference between that and taking your own life? Because you mentioned that you had kind of had that as a backup plan.
Yeah, I did. Massive difference. Huge difference. Suicides are done in secret. So it's not something you can share with the family. My ideal is to die at home and have a party in the morning and during the day. Anyone who wants to stay can stay. Anybody who doesn't want to stay can go. So sit around at the house, play some music, share some food, laugh, hopefully take the mickey out of each other, and then that'd be perfect. So it's open and it's honest and it's painless. An assisted death, people know about it. It's planned in advance. You could have your wake in advance if you wanted to. You keep control of it, but everybody can share it if they wish to. They can have that part and parcel of it. And what you're not doing is dragging people into it. They didn't want any part of that, or you could scar for life.
Interesting how he makes that distinction. I mean, I can understand just for practical reasons that suicides are different, right? Compared to something like physician-assisted suicide, where it's institutionalized, it's legal, and stuff like that.
And can you understand why some people might disagree with the concept generally?
I fully support anybody's viewpoint, and I think they're entitled to a viewpoint where they're opposed to assisted dying. And that is their choice. I believe in choice. People who oppose us don't believe in choice. And it's pretty simple. If somebody meets the criteria and they want an assisted death, then that should be available to them. If somebody meets the criteria and they don't want an assisted death, then there should be sufficient funding within the National Health Service to provide palliative care for them.
There are a couple of different questions here, right? So one question is, is it morally permissible to take your own life? Okay. And if you think it's morally permissible to take your own life, then okay, then something like suicide should be, allowed. But what we're talking about here is physician-assisted suicide, right? So it's not just you taking your own life. It is somebody else helping you take your life, okay? And I think that's where some people will not be supportive of. Like that's where they start being critical of this position. Yes, it's your body, it is your life, and if you want to end it, you have the basic right to do that. But we shouldn't allow healthcare professionals to help you do that. So those are, I think they're two different issues. And you may think from a moral perspective, there's not really much of a difference between helping somebody die and actually killing them, right? So giving somebody a drug so that they take that will lead to their death, or just injecting them with that drug. Some people don't think that there is a moral distinction between those two things, right? So you can kind of put those things into one category, right? And another category would just be, suicide, like without assistance. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this video. I'll see you all next time.